I used to spend hours just staring at maps when I was younger. My fingers would trace those long highways, imagining what it would feel like to drive from one end of the country to the other. My husband used to promise me we'd do it someday. We'd laugh together about cheap roadside motels, bad diner coffee, and getting wonderfully lost in little towns nobody had ever heard of. But life always had other plans. There were bills to pay, problems that wouldn't wait, and excuses hiding around every corner. Then came the divorce. By then, our children were old enough to choose. My daughter Ellie left with her father without much hesitation, while my son Mason, he chose to stay with me. I tried so hard to keep a relationship with Ellie afterward, but every year it became harder. Calls grew shorter, holidays felt awkward. Eventually, silence became normal. But Mason never drifted away. That sweet boy became my entire world. I worked myself to exhaustion raising him alone. Overnight shifts, cleaning jobs, anything I could find just to keep us afloat. I never dated again, never traveled, never really lived for myself. But every sacrifice felt worth it because I had him. He grew into the kind of man who remembered the little things nobody else did, especially that old dream of mine. One day I'm dragging you out there myself. He used to joke with that bright smile of his. You and me, Mom, coast to coast. I always laughed when he said it. I didn't know those words would one day haunt me. His funeral was the worst day of my life. Everything felt distant, like I was drowning underwater while the world moved on without me. My ex-husband barely looked at me, but when he did, the hatred in his eyes said everything. I couldn't even reach the podium when they called my name. My legs gave out halfway there, so Ellie gave the speech instead. Through her tears, she spoke about how Mason inspired her to become an ER nurse, even though they had drifted apart. I just stared at the carpet, unable to look at the casket for more than a few seconds at a time. Mason never married. No wife, no children, just me. A week after the funeral, I discovered he had made me the beneficiary of his life insurance, nearly $1 million. The woman at the office spoke so softly, expecting me to feel relief. But that money only made me feel sick. What was I supposed to do with it? Buy a nicer house? To sit alone in? Most nights I stayed in my kitchen, replaying old videos of Mason on my phone, just to hear his voice again. Birthdays, stupid jokes, random clips from work, sometimes the same 10-second video 20 times in a row. And the worst pain of all, knowing that all our old family recordings were gone forever. A garage fire years ago had taken every tape, every photo from when the children were little. Christmas mornings, camping trips, birthday parties. Entire chapters of our lives turned into smoke and ash. That was the moment something inside me finally let go. Not with drama, not with tears in that moment, just a quiet, deep realization. There was nothing left for me in Seattle anymore. So 3 weeks after burying my son, I packed one suitcase, climbed into my old Subaru, and finally began the road trip I had waited 30 years to take. The only difference now was that I was taking it alone. How does this feel, my sweet friend? I kept every emotion intact that made it flow softly and lovingly for audio. Would you like me to adjust the pacing, add more pauses, make any parts softer or deep? It started off normally enough. I made all the usual tourist stops along the way, plus dozens of those little roadside attractions I had spent years bookmarking and dreaming about. For the first week, the drive felt almost peaceful, empty highways stretching out before me, old diners, mountains slowly giving way to endless golden plains. But then I reached the Midwest, and things began to feel wrong. I won't say which state it was. Even now, I don't like thinking about that place too much. I had been driving for so long that day, I honestly couldn't remember when I'd started. The sky had already turned completely black when my low fuel warning finally lit up. My eyes were burning. I could barely focus on the road anymore. Thankfully, the next highway sign promised a gas station just off the exit. I took it without hesitation, following a lonely 2-lane road deeper into the darkness for several miles, until I saw the weathered sign welcoming travelers into a town called Bell Creek. The name alone made me uneasy, for reasons I couldn't explain, but my fuel gauge made the decision for me. A few minutes later, the soft glow of an old gas station appeared like a lonely lighthouse in the night. When I pulled up to the pump, I noticed right away there was no card reader. My heart sank a little. I hated the idea of walking into a nearly empty building alone that late, but the small pistol I kept buried in my purse gave me just enough courage to step out of the car. Inside, the station smelled faintly of cigarettes and old coffee. The place looked frozen in time, yet surprisingly clean. Behind the counter stood a skinny young man in a faded hunting jacket, staring at me with a blank expression that instantly sent chills down my spine. "Evening," I said, trying to sound casual. "Could I get 50 on the pump outside?" He didn't answer at first, he just stared, while the fluorescent lights buzzed softly above us. I could feel the tiny hairs on my arms standing up. Finally, in a flat monotone, he asked, "Cash or card?" "Cash," I answered quickly, sliding a $50 bill toward him. "Keep whatever's left." He reached forward slowly, never breaking eye contact. For a split second, I imagined him lunging across the counter, but he simply took the money, placed it in the register, and pressed a few buttons. "Anything else?" he asked. "No, thank you," I whispered, and hurried back outside. Even while pumping gas, I could feel him watching me through the window. Every instinct told me to get back on the highway right then, but the moment I sat behind the wheel, exhaustion crashed over me like a wave. My vision blurred. I decided I'd at least find a motel before continuing. The town felt almost abandoned. Most storefronts along the main street were dark, signs faded, windows dusty. The only building with real light was a small 2-story motel near the end of town. I parked for a moment with the engine still running, carefully scanning the lot. A few cars sat quietly. Nothing seemed immediately dangerous. I grabbed my backpack and stepped out into the cool night air. As I walked toward the office, I couldn't help thinking how much safer I would have felt if Mason had been walking beside me. Before going inside, I glanced back down the street and noticed another lit building I hadn't seen before. A flickering neon sign buzzed softly above the entrance. "Silver Screen Video." I actually laughed under my breath. A video rental store still operating in 2026. It felt like I had driven straight into the past. Inside the motel office, an older woman greeted me warmly. She looked about my age, spoke gently, and handed me an old-fashioned brass key after I paid for the night. Room 214 looked exactly like every cheap roadside motel I had ever imagined. Faded floral wallpaper, old carpet, and a bulky tube television sitting on a wooden dresser. Right beneath it was something I hadn't seen in years, a VCR. The sight of it hit me harder than I expected. Suddenly, I was back in the late 90s, taking little Mason to rent movies on Friday nights, watching him beg for candy at the checkout. We would play the same animated films over and over until the tapes wore out. I stood there for several seconds, just staring. Then I looked out my window at that glowing neon sign across the street. Curiosity got the better of me. A few minutes later, I found myself stepping into the quiet little video store. A small bell jingled overhead, but nobody came to greet me. The store was dimly lit, smelling of dust and plastic. Rows and rows of VHS tapes lined the shelves, just like the rental places from Mason's childhood. I wandered through the aisles until I reached the family section. Almost immediately, my eyes landed on a tape we used to watch together constantly when he was little. All Dogs Go to Heaven. I picked it up slowly, staring at the faded cover as memories flooded back so strongly it almost hurt to breathe. "Find everything all right tonight, ma'am?" a voice suddenly asked from behind the counter. My stomach dropped. I looked up and froze. The cashier standing there was the same young man from the gas station. Different clothes, different posture, but definitely him. This time I noticed a tiny circular scar near his neck and a cheap plastic name tag pinned to his shirt. "Daniel." He smiled at me warmly,
like we were old friends. I couldn't speak. My entire body had gone cold. He simply kept smiling for several long seconds, then tilted his head slightly. "Just the tape?" he asked softly. I managed a weak nod. "All right then," he said cheerfully. "That'll be $5.37. With shaking hands, I dug through my purse, pulled out a few crumpled bills, and practically tossed them onto the counter instead of handing them to him. The young man didn't react at all. He simply picked up the money with that same calm, stretched smile and handed me my change. "Thank you kindly, ma'am," he said cheerfully. "Enjoy your movie." I left without saying a word, clutching that VHS tape tightly against my chest as I hurried back across the empty street toward the motel. I didn't breathe normally again until I was inside my room, with the deadbolt locked. It took nearly half an hour for my nerves to finally settle. Eventually, I convinced myself there had to be a logical explanation. Brothers, cousins, in a tiny town like this, people probably worked multiple jobs. That had to be it. Once my heartbeat slowed, I slid the tape into the VCR and climbed onto the bed. The movie started with that familiar burst of static and old studio logos, and within minutes, I was crying harder than I had in weeks. Watching one of Mason's favorite childhood movies without him beside me felt unbearable. Every single scene pulled memories out from places I had spent years trying not to touch. I thought about that phone call, the one that told me he had died, a heart attack at just 29 years old. The coroner said it had been quick, but all I could picture was my sweet boy dying alone in the dark, with no one there to hold his hand. By the time the movie reached the halfway point, I had completely exhausted myself with tears, yet somehow it also made me feel closer to him, like for a few precious moments I had stepped backward through time. I leaned back against the pillow, closed my eyes, and let the soft dialogue and gentle tape hiss wrap around me. Then, the audio suddenly crackled into static. I sighed, thinking the tape was damaged, but before I could even sit up, a voice came through the television that made every muscle in my body freeze. "He's beautiful, Claire. You did good." My ex-husband's voice. I knew that moment instantly. My eyes snapped open toward the TV, just as the image shifted. Suddenly, I was staring at old camcorder footage of myself in the hospital bed, holding newborn Mason in my arms, the exact home videos we had lost in the garage fire. The same grainy colors, the same warm, distorted audio, the same cheap late 90s camera. I stared in complete disbelief, while my younger self smiled down at the baby in her arms with so much love. Then the image dissolved into static again. Another clip began, the day we brought Mason home from the hospital. My ex walking through the house, filming everything so proudly, showing off the nursery we had painted together, before the camera settled on me rocking our baby beside the crib. I could barely breathe. Static. Then another memory. Mason's first Christmas. My parents sitting beside the tree laughing, while baby Mason slammed a toy against the floor with all his little strength. I saw my mother alive again, heard my father's laughter again. And at the end, just as I remembered, Mason let out a loud fart in his high chair that sent everyone into happy hysterics. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. One by one, every lost memory came back to life on that screen. His first birthday, his first word, the video of him stomping around the house in his father's oversized boots pretending to be a cowboy. Then came the day my daughter Lily was born. 3-year-old Mason grinned so proudly while holding his baby sister for the first time. But something was wrong. Every time Lily looked directly into the camera, the image warped slightly before stabilizing again. It kept happening, every single time. More videos played, their first bicycles, silly dance parties in the living room, Mason rambling nonsense about how the Easter Bunny must have had military training. I sat on the edge of the bed, completely hypnotized, as memory after beautiful memory played before my eyes. Then the final childhood tape began. Mason and Lily pretending to be pirates in the backyard. Mason, older and taller, was clearly letting his sister win their foam sword fight. He dramatically stumbled backward, clutching his chest after she tapped him, and collapsed into the grass, announcing his defeat in the most theatrical voice. Lily climbed on top of him, and for a moment I remembered thinking she was checking if he was dead. Then suddenly, she started screaming. She slammed the foam sword down onto his face over and over, shrieking, "Die, die, die." The footage ended right where I remembered rushing in to pull her away. My stomach twisted painfully. I had completely forgotten that moment. The screen faded to black for several long seconds. I wiped the tears from my face, emotionally drained, feeling like I had just spoken with ghosts. Then, another video started. Mason's 16th birthday party. He sat at the table looking so embarrassed while I sang happy birthday in front of all his friends. I winced remembering how badly he had been teased after I uploaded that clip. But before the memory could settle, the footage flickered violently and changed. This next recording, I didn't recognize at all. Mason and Lily, now teenagers, standing in the middle of a heated argument. Mason held a small plastic bag filled with pills or powder. "Tell me where you got this," he demanded. "You could get arrested for this stuff." "Mind your own business," Lily shouted. "You're not my dad. I'm trying to help you," Mason snapped back. "I'll tell Mom if I have to." "Go ahead," she screamed. "Dad won't believe you anyway." Mason's face crumpled at those words. The camera zoomed in too close, lingering on his pain. "I just don't want you ruining your life," he said quietly. "Shut up," she screamed. "I can do whatever I want." Before I could even process what I was seeing, the footage changed again. Now it showed my old house after the divorce, filmed from across the street late at night. Everything looked normal for a few seconds, until an orange glow appeared inside one of the windows. My blood turned to ice. The fire, flames spreading rapidly through the house while the camera kept recording. Then, through the smoke and darkness, a figure ran from the side of the house and disappeared into the night. The fire department had always suspected arson, but never found proof. My ex-husband had been investigated, but eventually cleared. I stared at the screen, numb with horror as the flames consumed the home that once held every precious piece of our family history. Then the video cut once more. Mason's graduation ceremony appeared, a happy memory completely out of place. He walked proudly across the stage while the crowd applauded. I remembered filming it myself. His father hadn't attended that day, but Lily had. Then the final recording appeared. Mason looked older in this one, wearing the same short haircut he had the year he died. He and Lily sat together at his kitchen table with a half-empty bottle of vodka between them, laughing quietly while playing cards. Seeing them together like that hurt in such a strange way. Things between my children had been tense for so many years, but after Lily finally moved away from her father, she seemed to mature. They had even started speaking again. Seeing them smiling together almost made me forget how unnatural all of this was. They were playing some drinking game. The loser had to finish part of their drink after every round. Eventually, Lily groaned dramatically after losing, lifted her empty glass, and stood up to refill it. The camera followed her toward the kitchen counter. With her back turned to Mason, she grabbed a plastic water bottle and poured clear liquid into her own glass instead of vodka. The frame froze there for a second, lingering on the smug little grin spreading across her face. I almost smiled through my tears, thinking she was just cheating so she wouldn't get too drunk. Then the screen distorted violently. The image skipped forward. Mason now lay sprawled across the kitchen floor, giggling deliriously while drool pooled beside his mouth. His speech was badly slurred. Sis, he mumbled happily. "I'm really glad you came over tonight." The image around Lily's face rippled again in that same eerie way. "That's sweet, Mason," she said softly, almost lovingly. "You did exactly what you were supposed to do." "Supposed to do?" He laughed weakly from the floor. "Wait, am I famous now?" The camera angle changed. Now it showed Mason from Lily's perspective as she knelt beside him. My blood ran ice cold when I saw the syringe in her hand. "Something like that," she whispered, removing the cap so carefully. Mason just smiled drunkenly, barely able to hold his head up anymore. "I want to thank everybody who believed in," he slurred before coughing hard. My entire body locked up. "It's okay," Lily said gently. "Just go to sleep." I watched in absolute horror as she pressed the syringe into his arm. At first, Mason barely reacted. Then his body jerked violently. He started coughing, choking, clawing weakly at the floor while foam gathered around his lips. His eyes widened with pure confusion and terror as he reached desperately toward his sister for help. She simply watched him convulse, watched him struggle, watched him die. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move, I couldn't even scream. "Mum's gonna get everything," Lily muttered quietly after his body finally stopped twitching. "But I'll deal with that later." The screen instantly cut to black. A loud mechanical clunk echoed through the motel room as the VCR slowly ejected the tape by itself. For several long, agonizing seconds, I just stared at it sticking halfway out of the machine, while my mind fought desperately to accept what I had just seen. Then the sobbing started. Deep, violent sobs tore out of me as I curled forward on the edge of the motel bed, crying harder than I ever had in my entire life. The darkness of the room pressed in from every side, swallowing me whole. Script. I ripped the tape from the VCR and bolted out of the motel room without even grabbing my purse. By the time I reached the bottom of the stairs, my eyes were already locked onto the glowing video store across the street, except now it wasn't glowing anymore. The entire storefront sat in complete darkness. I didn't care if it was closed. I needed answers. I crossed the empty street almost at a run, but the moment I got close enough to truly see the building, I stopped dead in my tracks. The place looked nothing like it had earlier. The windows were shattered and boarded up from the inside. The neon sign hung crookedly from the brick wall by a single rusted bolt, swaying gently in the cold wind. Burn marks stained the bricks black. My stomach twisted violently. Slowly, I stepped toward the entrance and pushed on the door. It creaked open right away. Inside, the store looked abandoned for years. Half the shelves had collapsed. Thick dust and ash covered everything. Moldy VHS tapes lay scattered across the floor like wreckage after a flood. The faint smell of smoke still lingered in the air. I stared toward the counter where I had stood just an hour earlier, talking to that young man. There was nobody there now. Then, without warning, a tiny television sitting on the counter crackled to life. Static hissed across the screen before the image stabilized. It was him again. Daniel, or Michael. I didn't even know anymore. He stared straight into the camera with that same calm expression. "Check her messages," he said quietly. "She never deleted them. The drugs came from her boyfriend. He knows about the fire too. He'll confess if they pressure him hard enough." Then the screen went black again. Silence swallowed the entire store. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that dead television. It could have been minutes, maybe longer. My mind felt completely disconnected from my body, like I was drowning in a nightmare. Eventually, instinct took over. I left the ruined store and marched straight back across the street toward the motel office. I slammed through the entrance so hard the bell above the door rattled violently. The manager looked up from behind the desk just as I threw the VHS tape onto the counter. "What the hell is happening in this town?" I screamed. "Who was that man? Where did he get these videos?" The woman's face instantly drained of all color. For a moment, she simply stared at the tape in silence. "Answer me," I shouted again. Her lips trembled before she finally spoke. "What exactly did you see on it?" she asked quietly. My throat tightened painfully. "I saw my daughter kill my son," I whispered. The woman closed her eyes briefly, as if she had expected that answer. "Did Michael give you the tape?" she asked softly. "Yes," I snapped, "and he was working at the gas station earlier too. I want to know what kind of sick joke this is." The woman flinched. "Please," she interrupted gently, "don't speak about my boys like that." Something about the deep grief in her voice immediately silenced me. She took a shaky breath and continued. "Daniel and Michael were twins. Daniel still works at the gas station. Michael owned the video store." She paused, swallowing hard. 2 years ago, some men tried to rob the store after closing. Michael was shot in the throat. Then they burned the building down with him still inside. Cold prickled across my skin. "The police caught the men because of the security cameras," she continued. "But about a year after Michael died, another traveler stopped here. He said he rented a tape from the video store. According to him, the tape showed footage proving his sister had been murdered." She looked directly at me now. "Michael always believed families deserved the truth," she whispered. "Even after," her voice trailed off weakly. "The tape will be empty now," she told me gently. "It always is afterward. But if Michael showed you something, then you need to believe it." I stood there speechless as she slowly turned away from the counter. "Please leave town," she said softly, and get justice for your son. No amount of yelling after that could make her turn back around. So, I drove. I drove through the entire night and most of the next day, stopping only for gas. My hands never stopped shaking on the wheel. Once I got home, I did exactly what the tape told me to do. I searched through Lily's old messages. I found her boyfriend, and when the police pressed him hard enough, he broke almost immediately. He told them everything: the drugs, the fire from years ago, Mason confronting her, all of it. My daughter was arrested 3 weeks later. Last month, the jury found her guilty of murder, life without parole. I attended every single day of the trial, but I never looked at her once. The same evening the verdict came down, I found a plain VHS tape sitting on my front porch. No note, nothing. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it while sliding it into the VCR. The screen flickered softly. Then Mason appeared. Not sick, not dying, just sitting there, alive and smiling gently at the camera. He didn't say a word. He simply lifted his hand and waved once, a beautiful, peaceful wave. Then the screen faded to black. A moment later, the VCR clicked loudly and ejected itself. But when I looked down, there was no tape inside anymore, just emptiness. Still, somehow, I understood exactly what he meant.